have a warrant to search this place. Step aside and keep your hands where I can see them.
Okay, show me the warrant first, then I will.
You don't get to give orders here. I don't have to show anything.
Actually, you do. It's called the Fourth Amendment.
If you keep interfering with the investigation, I'm going to have to arrest you.
I want to see your supervisor, sir.
It was 7:17 a.m. a.m. when the officer's body cam caught the woman standing in the doorway. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't shaking, she wasn't scared. She was calm in a way that made the hallway feel smaller. The camera angle tilted slightly as the officer shifted his weight, the brick wall on the right side of the frame filling half the screen. The door was cracked, chains still on, and the woman's hand rested on the edge like she had all the time in the world. Before we get into what actually happened next, do me a quick favor. If you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this get buried fast, and subscribing is the only way you will see what really goes on behind closed doors. And while you're at it, tap like so more people actually see this story. Now, let's get into it. The officer spoke first. His voice had that flat authority cops use when they expect compliance without questions. He told her they had a warrant. He told her to step aside. He didn't say her name. He didn't ask if she lived there. He didn't ask anything at all. She asked one thing in return. She asked to see the warrant. That was the first moment things went wrong for him. You could hear the irritation creep into his voice through the body cam microphone. He said they didn't need to show her anything. He said they were executing a lawful search. He said she was interfering. He said a lot of things that sounded official enough to scare most people into stepping back. She didn't move. She told him the Fourth Amendment required him to present the warrant before entry, not after, before. She said it clearly, without raising her voice, without adding emotion. Just facts. The officer laughed, a short laugh, the kind that says he'd already decided who she was the moment he saw her skin color and her clothes. He told her she didn't know what she was talking about. He told her obstruction was a crime. He told her to open the door. That was when she told him who she was. She said she was an assistant United States attorney. She said she prosecuted police officers for civil rights violations. She said if he crossed that threshold without showing a valid warrant, she would personally file federal charges against him by Monday morning. The hallway went quiet. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when power suddenly shifts in a police interaction, this was it. And before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Country or state? I want to know how far stories like this are reaching. The officer didn't respond right away. The body cam showed him glance back at the two officers' stores behind him. They hadn't expected this. None of them had. They were narcotics officers, not used to being questioned, especially not by a black woman in sweatpants at a door they assumed belonged to someone else. The lead officer finally pulled a folded document from his vest pocket and held it up toward the crack in the door. She told him to slide it under so she could read it. He hesitated. Then he did it. She picked it up and read every line. Not skimmed, read. The body cam clock ticked. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The officer stood there, shifting, radios crackling faintly. When she looked up, her expression had changed. Not angry, focused. She opened the door fully. And that's when the questioning started. She asked about the confidential informant listed in the warrant, who they were, when they had provided information. The officer said he couldn't reveal that. She said that was fine, because she would subpoena the informant's identity in federal court. She said they both knew what would happen if the informant didn't exist. She asked about the alleged controlled buys, dates, times, amounts, locations. The officer said that information was in the file. She asked for the case number. He gave it to her. She asked why the warrant authorized a search of the entire building instead of a specific unit. He said the warrant covered the building. She explained that general warrants were prohibited by the Constitution and that searching multiple residences without individualized probable cause was illegal. You could hear the breathing change on the body cam. Then she asked who signed the warrant. When the officer said the judge's name, she smiled. Not because she was amused, because she knew exactly what that meant. She told them she knew the judge personally. She told them that judge would never approve a warrant like this unless the facts had been misrepresented. She told them she would be in that judge's chambers Monday morning, asking very specific questions. Then she asked the question that ended it. She asked if the lead officer was the same one who had been investigated twice before for questionable search warrants. No one answered. Before I continue, if you're finding this story eye-opening, make sure you like the video. It helps more than you think, and it tells the algorithm this is content that matters. She gave them two options: walk away and face an investigation, or execute the warrant and face federal prison for deprivation of rights under color of law. She didn't threaten. She explained. The officers left. They didn't argue. They didn't push past her. They didn't knock again. They walked away because they knew exactly how real the consequences were. She closed the door and made 3 phone calls, one to her supervisor, one to the FBI Public Corruption Task Force, one to Internal Affairs. By Monday morning, the lead officer was on administrative leave. By Wednesday, federal agents were reviewing his warrants from the past 2 years. By Friday, he was under arrest. Now pause for a second and comment below. Do you think most illegal searches only get stopped when the person being searched has power, or do you think the system protects officers by default? I want to hear your take. The investigation uncovered something worse than one bad warrant. It uncovered a pattern. Dozens of warrants with the same language, the same vague informants, the same exaggerated claims, the same neighborhoods, the same types of residents, mostly black, mostly Latino. The officer went to trial. He claimed good faith. He claimed mistakes. He claimed misunderstanding. The prosecutor dismantled that defense piece by piece. She showed identical language copied across unrelated cases. She showed approvals timed for Friday afternoons. She showed how judges were misled. The jury convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His career was over. His pension was gone. His name became a warning example in training sessions. And all of this started because he assumed the woman at the door didn't know her rights. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is for. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story. These don't show up twice. The department was forced into reforms. Warrant reviews, mandatory training, outside audits, lawsuits followed, settlements reached into the millions. People were released from prison when illegal searches were uncovered. And the woman at the door? She went back to work. She kept prosecuting. She kept pushing cases others avoided. She became a symbol of what accountability actually looks like when someone refuses to back down. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Most people don't get this outcome. Most people don't know the law. Most people don't have the power to enforce it. Most people get searched, intimidated, silenced, and told to deal with it later. That's why stories like this matter. Before you leave, drop a comment with one thing you learned from this story, one detail you didn't know before. And if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe so these stories keep reaching people who need to hear them. Because the next door officers knock on might not belong to a federal prosecutor, and that's exactly why accountability has to exist. The body cam footage from that morning didn't just end up as evidence in a courtroom, it became something else entirely. Within days of Derek Mullins being placed on administrative leave, copies of the footage were circulating internally through the department. Officers watched it in squad rooms, break rooms, and training offices. Not because they were ordered to at first, but because word spread fast. A narcotics officer had tried to execute a warrant on the wrong door, and the person who answered wasn't just anyone. She was someone who knew exactly how fragile their authority actually was when it wasn't backed by law. If you're still watching right now, take a second and hit like. The more engagement this gets, the more people see how these situations actually unfold in real life. The footage showed the moment everything shifted. It showed the lead officer's confidence draining away when Jasmine identified herself. It showed the pause, the hesitation, the realization that this wasn't going to be another routine search where nobody pushed back. That pause became the most replayed moment of the video. Trainers would later freeze frame it and ask officers one simple question. What should have happened differently before this moment ever occurred? Inside the Philadelphia Police Department, panic set in quietly at first. Supervisors began pulling warrant files on their own initiative before federal agents even formally requested them. Some officers started calling union reps. Others started deleting old notes and texts, not realizing that deletion only made things worse. The narcotics unit had operated on a culture of shortcuts for years, and suddenly those shortcuts were being examined under a microscope. Federal investigators didn't rush. They didn't need to. The warrants spoke for themselves. Language copied word for word across unrelated cases. Confidential informants who appeared everywhere and nowhere at once. Probable cause paragraphs that sounded impressive but collapsed under scrutiny. Each warrant alone might have been explained away. Together, they told a story of systematic abuse, and at the center of it all was Derek Mullins. Before we go further, comment below and tell me this. Do you think patterns like this exist in most departments, or do you believe this was an isolated unit that went too far? I want to hear what you think. Mullins had built his career on numbers, arrests, seizures, statistics that looked good on paper. He was the kind of officer supervisors liked because he produced results. Drugs confiscated, charges filed, neighborhoods cleaned up. What those numbers didn't show were the lives disrupted by illegal searches, the doors kicked in for nothing, the people humiliated and traumatized because an officer assumed nobody would challenge him. When federal agents interviewed him, Mullins stuck to the same script. He said he relied on informants. He said mistakes happen. He said he acted in good faith. But the problem with lies is that they don't age well under evidence. Each interview revealed another inconsistency, another detail that didn't line up with paperwork, another moment where his memory conveniently failed him. The agents didn't raise their voices. They didn't threaten him. They just let him talk. And the more he talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't negligence. It was intent. Meanwhile, Jasmine stayed out of the spotlight as much as possible. She recused herself from testifying about the door encounter to avoid any claim of bias. But she didn't step away from the broader investigation. She worked quietly behind the scenes, helping build the framework that allowed prosecutors to connect the dots between dozens of cases. She reviewed warrants late into the night. She compared language patterns. She helped identify which judges had been misled and how. Her expertise turned what could have been a messy internal scandal into a clean federal case. If you appreciate detailed stories like this that go beyond headlines, make sure you're subscribed. This channel focuses on what really happens, not the watered-down version. When the indictment came down, it shocked the department. 2 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, 1 count of perjury, potential decades in prison. Mullins went from being a decorated narcotics officer to a federal defendant overnight. His badge was taken, his gun surrendered, his colleagues stopped answering his calls. At trial, the prosecution laid everything out with surgical precision. They didn't rely on emotion, they relied on patterns. Jurors saw warrant after warrant, each one more damning than the last. They heard from residents whose homes had been searched for nothing, parents who had watched officers tear apart their living rooms while their children cried, people who had never been charged with a crime but carried the memory of that knock for years. The defense tried to paint Mullins as a hard-working officer overwhelmed by paperwork. That argument fell apart when prosecutors showed how carefully timed his submissions were, how often they were approved when judges were busiest, how rarely his warrants were denied. It wasn't sloppiness, it was strategy. The verdict was unanimous: 8 years in federal prison. When the sentence was read, Mullins didn't look angry. He looked stunned. Like someone who had lived his entire career believing consequences were for other people. Outside the courtroom, the story exploded. Media outlets framed it as a rare example of accountability. Police unions called it a witch hunt. Social media split along predictable lines. But one thing was undeniable. The footage from that doorway had changed everything. Before you scroll away, drop a comment and tell me this. Do you think body cameras protect citizens more, or do they mainly protect police? There's no right answer, but the discussion matters. The fallout didn't end with Mullins. Supervisors were scrutinized. Training protocols were rewritten. The city settled multiple lawsuits quietly to avoid jury trials. Millions were paid out, not because the city admitted wrongdoing, but because the evidence made denial impossible. Jasmine received threats, emails, messages telling her to watch her back. She also received letters from people she had never met thanking her for standing firm. Mothers, fathers, young adults who had grown up believing the law only worked against them. She kept every letter, because she knew something most people didn't. This case wasn't an ending. It was a warning shot, a signal that unchecked authority eventually runs into someone who knows how to stop it. If this story made you think differently about police encounters, hit like. It tells me to keep bringing these stories to you. The department instituted reforms. Some officers embraced them, others resented them. Compliance was uneven. Old habits die hard. But one thing had changed permanently. Officers knew that warrants weren't just paperwork anymore. They were potential evidence. Jasmine continued her work. Case after case, officer after officer, quietly reshaping how accountability looked in practice rather than theory. And it all traced back to one Saturday morning. One knock, one refusal to step aside. Before we move to the next part of this story, make sure you're subscribed. The next section dives into what happened to the people whose lives were overturned by those illegal searches, and how long the damage actually lasts after the cameras turn off. Tell me in the comments if you're ready for that part. The first letter arrived without warning. No press release, no phone call, just a white envelope with a federal return address dropped into a mailbox like any other piece of mail. Inside was a single-page notice explaining that a search warrant connected to a past investigation had been flagged as potentially unconstitutional, and that the recipient might be entitled to legal review or relief. For many people, that letter landed years after the damage had already been done. Before we go any further, if you're still watching, hit the like button. Stories like this rarely get told from start to finish, and engagement is the only reason they reach people outside a small circle. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This is the kind of content most channels avoid. One of those letters went to a man named Roland Price. Roland had been 26 when officers from Derek Mullins' unit executed a warrant at his apartment. It was early morning. His door came off its hinges. Officers poured in with guns drawn. They searched every room. They found a small quantity of drugs in a shared hallway trash bin and claimed it was his. He was arrested, charged, and convicted. 3 years in state prison. Roland lost his job within days of his arrest. His girlfriend moved out while he was incarcerated. His daughter grew up visiting him through glass. When he was released, he came back to a world that had moved on without him. When the letter arrived, Roland didn't celebrate. He sat on the edge of his bed and stared at it for a long time, because the letter didn't give him back his time. It didn't erase his record. It didn't undo the damage. It just confirmed what he had always known. The search should never have happened. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the system admits its mistakes too late to matter, comment below. This section is for you. Roland wasn't alone. As federal agents reopened cases connected to Mullins' warrants, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Homes searched with no specific probable cause. Entire buildings authorized instead of individual units. Informants cited but never documented. Judges misled with language. That sounded precise but meant nothing. Each case had its own story. Different names, different streets, same playbook. A woman named Alicia Freeman received her letter next. 5 years earlier, her door had been kicked in while her son was getting ready for school. Officers tore through her apartment looking for drugs tied to someone she barely knew. They found nothing. No charges, no apology. What stayed with her wasn't the search. It was her son asking if the police were going to come back again. When she read the letter, she didn't feel relief. She felt anger. Anger that it took a federal prosecutor accidentally being targeted for the truth to come out. Before you keep watching, drop your city or country in the comments. Stories like this don't belong to one place. The U.S. Attorney's Office moved carefully. They knew what was at stake. Overturning convictions meant reopening wounds. It meant confronting the reality that innocent people had been punished because officers cut corners and supervisors looked away. 19 charges were dismissed outright. 5 convictions were overturned. Each overturned case triggered a domino effect. Appeals, resentencing hearings, compensation claims, civil lawsuits. The city's legal department worked overtime to contain the fallout. But there was no containing the human cost. Some people were released from prison with nowhere to go. Others had records that still haunted background checks. Families tried to rebuild trust that had been shattered years earlier. This is the part of police misconduct people rarely see. It doesn't end when an officer goes to prison. If you think accountability should include repairing harm, not just punishment, hit like right now. Inside the Philadelphia Police Department, morale fractured. Some officers felt betrayed. Others felt exposed. Younger officers quietly admitted they had always been uncomfortable with how warrants were handled, but didn't feel safe speaking up. Supervisors were scrutinized in ways they hadn't been before. Lieutenant Thomas Brennan's conviction changed the conversation permanently. For the first time, command-level officers were being held criminally responsible, not for what they did, but for what they allowed. Emails were reviewed, approval logs examined, training records pulled. It became clear that sloppy oversight wasn't accidental. It was cultural. Brennan had approved dozens of warrants in minutes. sometimes without reading them fully, sometimes without asking questions. He trusted his numbers guy. He trusted Mullins. That trust sent people to prison. If you're still here, subscribe now. This section matters more than the viral moments ever do. When Brennan was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, officers in the courtroom avoided eye contact. The message was clear. Rank was no longer insulation. Behind closed doors, departments across the city began auditing themselves preemptively. No one wanted to be next. Legal. Advisors were suddenly invited into rooms they had never been in before. Warrant language was rewritten. Approval processes slowed, not because of ethics, because of fear. Insurance carriers made it explicit. Continued coverage depended on demonstrable reform. Without insurance, the department couldn't function. Money did what morality hadn't. Community trust, however, didn't return on a schedule. In neighborhoods affected by Mullins's unit, people remained cautious. Doors stayed locked, cameras stayed on. Interactions with police were polite but guarded. Jasmine understood that better than anyone. She never framed the case as a victory. In private conversations, she called it what it was: a necessary intervention, not a solution. She continued prosecuting police misconduct cases with the same methodical precision. No speeches, no press theatrics, just evidence, patterns, and patience. Her workload doubled. She became the prosecutor. Other prosecutors consulted quietly. The one they asked when a case felt off. The one they called when warrant language didn't sit right. If you're learning something from this story that mainstream coverage never explains, leave a comment. It tells me to keep doing this. Jasmine also started receiving letters. Some were threats, explicit, racist, designed to intimidate. She reported them all. She changed nothing about her routine. Others were thank you notes, parents, former defendants, people who had lost faith in the system entirely and saw, for the first time, someone inside it willing to challenge power. She kept every one. One letter stood out. It was from Roland. He wrote that he didn't expect justice to feel so quiet, that he thought accountability would feel bigger, louder. He said he was grateful, but also tired of rebuilding, tired of explaining gaps in his life. He asked one question at the end: how many more never get letters like this? Jasmine didn't answer, because there was no honest answer that didn't hurt. If you're still watching at this point, type "still here" in the comments. This section separates real viewers from drive-by clicks. The department implemented reforms publicly. Mandatory legal review for all warrants. Body cameras required during executions. Random audits. Outside oversight. Compliance was mixed. Some officers embraced the changes. Others resisted quietly. Old habits didn't disappear overnight. But one thing had shifted permanently. Warrants were no longer treated as paperwork. They were treated as evidence. Across the city, judges began scrutinizing applications more carefully. Questions were asked that hadn't been asked before. Requests for clarification increased. Denials became more common. This slowed investigations. Some officers complained. Jasmine considered that a feature, not a flaw. Slower justice was better than unlawful justice. If you agree, hit like. Derek Mullins adjusted to prison life poorly. Without authority, without uniform, without the quiet protection of the badge, he was just another inmate. Appeals were filed and denied. Letters from supporters dwindled. He blamed supervisors. He blamed prosecutors. He blamed politics. He never publicly accepted responsibility. His pension was gone. His career erased. His name became a cautionary example used in training sessions across the department, not as a villain, as a warning. Jasmine still lives in the same building. She didn't move. She refused to let fear dictate her space. She upgraded security quietly. She kept her routine. She believed retreat would send the wrong message. Sometimes she thinks about that morning, not with pride, with precision. She knows exactly how many things had to align for accountability to happen. She knows most people don't get that alignment. That knowledge drives her work. Before you leave, comment one thing you learned from this section, something that surprised you, something that stuck. Because this story isn't about one bad cop. It's about systems that reward shortcuts, punish dissent, and rely on silence to survive. It's about what happens when someone with knowledge and authority refuses to step aside. It's about how ordinary paperwork can destroy lives quietly, and how rare it is for those lives to be acknowledged after the fact. Most illegal searches never make headlines. Most victims never get letters. Most officers never face consequences. But this time, they did. And that matters. If you found this story important, subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and they need to be told without distortion.